All right, welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Giacomo Luca. Thanks so much for joining us, taking a beautiful live look out at the U.S. Capitol today. Here at 2:09 now on the East Coast, 11:09 over on the West Coast. Just look at those clouds moving slowly there right over the top of the Capitol Rotunda, which has been the focus of a lot of attention this week as the House has not had a speaker for at least 2 weeks. Now, the Republicans have ousted Jim Jordan from the party as nominee for Speaker after a third failed vote. Sources told Fox News Digital that the conference had voted to remove Jordan as the nominee in a closed-door meeting happening last night. Jordan had even more Republicans vote against him in the third round of voting for the House Speaker's gavel on Friday than before. 25 Republicans, people from his own party, voting against him, giving him just 194 votes, far short of the approximately 217 that he'd need to win the Speaker's race. It's his lowest total so far in all three of those ballots. We want to go ahead now and bring in Isaac Hale. He's a professor over at Occidental College in Los Angeles. He's also an elections and politics expert. Thanks so much for joining us today here on Live Now from Fox, Isaac. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, let's jump right into this. Jim Jordan getting ousted. Did this come as a surprise to you?
No. After what happened to the former #1 Republican in the House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy, and then his top lieutenant, Steve Scalise, it shouldn't come as a surprise that Republicans weren't able to get 217 votes for Jim Jordan, the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. I think the interesting feature here is that most of Jordan's opposition came from the more moderate wing of the House Republican caucus, rather than the House Freedom Caucus, who bedeviled both Scalise and McCarthy.
Isaac, what are next steps as the House has to get some sort of agreement reached soon because we have that looming budget deal?
Yeah, and the House can't really take up any legislation until they have a speaker. So there is a crowded field emerging to take to compete over the speaker's mantle. These include Republicans Tom Emmer, who's the majority whip in the House of Representatives. They also include Republican Study Committee Chair, Representative Kevin Hern from Oklahoma, Jack Bergman from Michigan, Pete Sessions from Texas, Byron Donald from Florida, Austin Scott from Georgia, all of whom have thrown their hat in the ring, and there may be even more coming up. So Republican lawmakers have until Sunday at noon to make their candidacy official before a Monday night candidate forum and an internal GOP House conference vote on Tuesday morning, where they will select their nominee as they did with Scalise and Jordan before them.
Who do you think really has the top hat in the running, or does the GOP even know any idea of who they, could possibly pick for their next speaker?
To your latter question, no, I don't think they know who is going to be the next speaker. In terms of who is likely to win the endorsement of the caucus, like Jordan and Scalise did, I think Majority Whip Tom Emmer is the most likely candidate. He's the #3 House Republican. He's likely going to be able to assemble similar coalitions that Scalise and McCarthy were able to assemble to win those caucus votes. But then when he actually has to go out onto the floor, he may meet the same fate they did, with House Freedom Caucus holdouts preventing him from actually taking the Speaker's gavel.
Why is the House Speaker so important in the context of U.S. politics? And why is so much being held up by a single position in the House?
Well, the House just cannot proceed on legislation without a speaker. This is a constitutional requirement, and so they have to select a speaker before they do anything else. And it's taken a long time to pick a speaker before at various points throughout American history. Back prior to the Civil War in 1856, Nathaniel Price took about 133 votes, I believe, to become speaker over the process of 2 months. So it's not unheard of for the process to be drawn out, but this is certainly unprecedented in modern American politics.
And what does that signal in terms of the situation in our country and the divisiveness that exists, especially in politics?
Well, it shows a dysfunctional political system, and our politics have polarized substantially. And I think it also points out to some of the potential shortcomings of American political institutions. We have a very old constitution and a very old constitutional order, and many of those institutions held together, with the exception of the Civil War, of course. But many other countries have deeply polarized politics but don't have this level of legislative dysfunction. American political institutions are not disposed to multi-party politics. They are not disposed to being conducive for partisan competition in the legislative process. And we are seeing, in an era where parties are increasingly central in the policymaking process, that our institutions are perhaps not well suited for that circumstance.
There's been a number of conversations about potentially putting the Speaker pro tem, Patrick McHenry, in as, or at least giving him some temporary power so then they can try to reach a budget deal or perhaps another stopgap that might last, 3 to 6 months. In terms of the effects of all of this on society, on our government, on the economy, what are those potential effects and perhaps even the ones happening already?
Well, first off, I'll say I do not think that it's very likely that McHenry is going to become an empowered Speaker pro tem, be given these essentially de facto Speaker powers. We've seen opposition to such a move from the House Freedom Caucus, who seems quite opposed to the expansion of that power, and also concerned that McHenry, someone who has been in support of CRs in the past, concerned that he would run afoul of their ideological priorities in the same way that Kevin McCarthy did before him. So there's going to be opposition there, and I think House Democrats would be probably pretty unwilling to support McHenry without some policy concessions. So I think we're kind of at an impasse in that regard. But to your other question about what happens if there isn't a speaker, well, we're hurtling towards another government shutdown, and if the House is not able to pick a speaker before that time, the government will shut down, with serious impacts for the economy, for federal employees, and for everyday Americans' lives.
And meanwhile, that ongoing war in Israel, sparking new fears about escalating tensions in the Mideast, as well as that continuing war going on over 600 days now in Ukraine, and the U.S. President Joe Biden's called for an additional $100 billion in aid to both of those countries, or a $100 billion package that would go to both of those countries to help in their war efforts and defense efforts. Can any of that even go through without a House Speaker?
No. But to expand on that answer, look, regardless of what you think of President Biden's policy proposal with expanded aid for Ukraine and Israel, I think it is certainly the case that we should all have the expectation that the House of Representatives fulfill its obligation, fulfill its constitutional duties to act as the people's house, to legislate. And the fact is, it's falling far short of those expectations right now.
Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leaders representing the Democrats in the House, received 210 votes yesterday, far more than Jim Jordan, but not enough to get the gavel. What about the potential of a Hakeem Jeffries taking over the House speakership with Republicans in charge, or seeing any Democrat at that by that?
I think it's incredibly unlikely. I think their Republicans have a majority in the House of Representatives, and every single one of those Republicans, despite their internal caucus differences, would far prefer to have a Republican Speaker of the House than a Democratic one. Now, this is not to say that bipartisan speaker coalitions are unheard of in the United States. In Texas, in the previous decade, we saw a coalition between Democrats and Republicans in the state legislature to elect a more moderate Republican House Speaker. And I certainly think that if this goes on long enough, you could see talk of some Democrats being willing to support a more moderate Republican Speaker, perhaps with some policy concessions. But I think that's probably quite a ways off, given where the Republican House caucus is at.
Yeah, and even Hakeem Jeffries himself yesterday in a number of press conferences said that pretty much at this point all options remain on the table, and is urging his Republican colleagues to find some sort of a bipartisan resolution to move forward. And he even mentioned, without saying names, of course, that there are a number of Republicans on the other side. He said, several that could make a good Speaker of the House, but continues to put the responsibility of that election on his Republican colleagues, of course. It seemed like a pretty fair analysis of kind of that situation. And also, is it the responsibility of Republicans at this time?
It has historically been the responsibility of the majority party in Congress to select the Speaker. Hakeem Jeffries is absolutely right about that. And if House Republicans would be interested in working in Democrats as the majority party, they should reach out to them, perhaps put forward a Speaker candidate who can offer some kind of either rules-based or policy-based concessions to Democrats in order to get their votes. The idea that the minority party in the House would supply votes for a majority party Speaker without any policy or rules concessions, I think there's no precedent for that in American politics. And given the degree of polarization between the parties, it's hard to imagine such an arrangement occurring.
Yeah, and with all of the divisiveness, especially within the party, and it seems to be coming from those, at least with the GOP side, some 20 far more extreme Republicans, more extreme conservatives that have created some of these issues, such as the 15 rounds that it took to elect McCarthy back in January, and now obviously he's been removed as Speaker from within his own party, just furthering this issue of divisiveness. What is it then within the party, and what does that signal about the American Republican Party in general as we continue to look at these issues happening in Congress?
I mean, we are continuing to see that the Republican Party is getting increasingly extreme and increasingly conservative. We've also seen over the past 20 years that the Democratic Party has gotten more liberal as well, at the same time as Republicans have gotten more conservative. But this is part of the story of the ongoing polarization of the American parties. And, it's been the case for quite some time that there is also a faction of the Republican Party that's fundamentally not that interested in governance and would far prefer a government shutdown to anything that's far away from their policy priorities. You saw the House Freedom Caucus was a pretty substantial thorn in the side of Republican House Speakers John Boehner and Paul Ryan, but their majorities at the time were big enough that they were able to sideline those concerns. Now Republicans have a much, much narrower majority, and the House Freedom Caucus holds the cards, as we saw in that vote to remove Kevin McCarthy as Speaker.
Talk about Steve Scalise for me. Why is he potentially being pulled back from the running, or at least what was the divisions that prevented some Republicans from voting for him? And then also Patrick McHenry is another one of those candidates for Speaker as well. Are they big potentials, I guess, for getting their names selected?
Well, I think the big difference between Scalise and McHenry is that McHenry has said that he does not want the job. Scalise clearly wants the job. He's been a major part of House Republican leadership for quite some time. He's been advancing through House Republican leadership, clearly with his eyes on the Speaker's office. But it appeared when he became the caucus's nominee that he wasn't able to get the votes together. I think he's been, he's now got the label of someone who was not able to assemble the caucus's support. I think he has some other baggage from his past that some of his opponents, like Representative Nancy Mace, pointed out. He had, back as a state legislator, attended a conference where he called himself David Duke without the baggage. So he has some skeletons in the closet himself, and he ultimately wasn't able to assemble a majority to become House Speaker when it was his turn up at the plate. And so I think the House Republican Caucus, at least for now, is looking for other potential nominees. But if this goes on long enough, I think there's no reason why you couldn't see Scalise and even McCarthy's name thrown around as potential speakers again.
Yeah, and to my last question, how exactly long could this go? What do you foresee?
Well, there's another election in 2024. But I mean, in all seriousness, we don't know how long this could go on. This could go on. This could be still going on at Thanksgiving. This could be still going on at Christmas. This could even be going on in 2024 if House Republicans aren't able to advance past the stalemate. Now, one would hope that this crisis could get resolved before the impending government shutdown, that there will be some kind of arrangement worked out either within the Republican caucus or with some kind of coalition between House Republicans and House Democrats. But so far, there's not really any signs of this impasse being surmounted.
Isaac Hale there, politics and elections expert over at Occidental College in Los Angeles. Thanks so much for joining us. Anything we didn't ask you? Anything you'd like to add?
No, I think you've covered it pretty well. Thank you for having me.
We sure do appreciate it there. Thanks so much again to Isaac coming on the show to break down all the latest as that House vote is going to have to continue that search for a Speaker of the House. We're headed out to a quick commercial break. We'll be back in just 2 minutes.